In Luke 2, did Jesus say that he was going to be in his Father's house or about his Father's business? Let's find out. All right. In Luke 2, the scene is that Jesus and his mother and his father Joseph are traveling to and from Jerusalem. There's feasts and festivals in the mix, and suddenly Jesus has disappeared. And specifically, it says Mary and his father started looking for him, but specifically Mary. And it says they were anxiously looking for him. And it took them days. They were searching for him among family members and everywhere, and they could not find him. Finally, they go back to the temple in Jerusalem, and they find Jesus sitting among the teachers, asking questions. And all the teachers were amazed at his understanding of things. But Mary goes up to him and says, "Why have you treated me and Joseph like this? We have been searching for you anxiously." And then we arrive in Luke chapter 2, verse 49. Jesus says, "Why were you searching for me?" He asked. "Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house?" That's what the NIV says. But the New King James says, "And he said to them, 'Why did you seek me? Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business?'" So now we'll see here, I have the NIV, the New King James, and then the morphological Greek New Testament. We notice that these translations are different. Did Jesus say that he was going to be in his Father's house or about his Father's business? That's the questions I ask when I come to these different translations. Well, which one is it? Which one? Obviously, they're both talking about the same thing, but which one is it? So I've chosen the NIV and the New King James here because those translations are reflective of the vast majority of English translations. It doesn't matter which one you really look at. You can look at the King James, New American Standard, the ESV, the NASB, any of them. And it's almost split halfway down the middle. They'll either choose to translate the end of this verse, "in my Father's house," or the other ones will choose "about my Father's business." So which one is it? That's the question I have. That's the question I wanted to answer today. So let's go through the Greek first and then see where the English is getting its cues from. So from the Greek, kai epen pros autus, and he said to them. So here's our verb, kai epen pros autus. Here's our object, and he said to them. And as you can see from the New King James, that's quite literal. And he said to them, literally word for word. But the NIV simply says he asked. The NIV makes a less word for word translation here from the Greek than the New King James does. This is not surprising. It's not that this always happens, but the NIV's translation philosophy is not to be necessarily word for word all the time. That's more of the New King James's philosophy and others like it. That brings us up to a point I want to quickly point out that there are generally two translation philosophies when it comes to translating the Bible. You will either choose to go the route of what's called dynamic equivalence or the route of formal equivalence. Dynamic equivalence means that you're more interested in getting the idea of the passage across rather than translating all the individual words. Formal equivalence means you're striving your best to translate every word as much as possible. That makes sense. Very quick note on this subject because I don't want to spend too long on it. It's a big subject. I am no scholar and I am no professor. I think it's worth noting, but I'm not going to get into any real depth on the subject today. But quick note on the translation. No translation is exactly word for word. No translation, not even one. You might find verses here and there or times here and there where it's better than others, but I'm talking books as a whole, chapters as a whole. No translation is literally word for word from the Greek. There are some Bibles called interlinear Bibles that are probably the closest thing we have to being a quote unquote literal word translation. But even those are not always 100% word for word. And one of the worst parts about an interlinear Bible is they don't, for the average reader, they don't exactly help you understand the text better. It helps you understand the Greek word order better, because you'll see that there are things that are often out of order from English, or at least different order from English, but they're very hard to read. They're certainly not fun to read, and they're very hard to understand. But if you want to get into the whole, I want a literal word for word Bible, well, you can pick up an interlinear, and they're just very tough to read. Translations that take a more dynamic equivalence approach to translation generally do a good job. And I almost feel bad saying good job, because good job is an understatement. These translations do a fantastic job of translating the biblical text. And usually they end up with a text that's very easy to read and understandable. You can understand what the author is trying to convey. Just know that there are dangers and consequences on both sides of this translation philosophy. On the dynamic equivalence side, you could mistranslate something and make it say something that it's not saying because you didn't translate the words. You translated what you thought was the idea. That's a risk. You could leave out words that are actually important because you're deciding how to translate the idea. You might decide, well, this little conjunction here isn't that important, so I'm going to leave it out. Of course, that doesn't usually mess with things so much, but you get what I'm saying there. And every translation committee and person asks themselves, where do I draw the line between strict literalism, and making it understandable for my audience? That's the dance. That's the art. And it's very hard. And if you want to know how hard it is, take any verse in the Bible. Just pick one. It doesn't matter. Pick one that at least has more than one word to it, which is most of them, which is just about all of them. But pick a word. Pick a verse. Pick 10 verses if you really want to spend some time on it, and translate it. Take one approach that goes word for word, formal equivalent. Take the other approach where you just want to try to get across the idea as best you can. And it's going to be very hard. You're going to find out that you've done better in some areas than others, and you've maybe missed the mark on some others. It's very hard. It is a very hard process, and most translations do a fantastic job of this. But the New King James, it takes a more formal equivalence approach, which means they're trying their best to translate every word as much as it is possible to make it understandable. But the danger in that approach is you could be so strict in your translation that it becomes unreadable or confusing or even just unclear. But you've still translated every word. So you've succeeded in translating every word, but you've made it unclear. I'm not saying that you always do that or that that's even a huge risk, but it is a risk to do that. So is the translation good just because it translates every word? No, it's not, because it must get across the idea correctly. That's the dance. It's a very hard thing to do. And again, I don't want to spend too much time on the topic because that's not what this video is about. I want to stay focused on this one verse, but just wanted to say from my perspective, the vast majority of English translations do a great job. But even though they differ on their philosophy of translation, and this is where we see a very simple example very clearly, literally from the Greek, and he said to them, which is literally translated in the New King James and others, but is summed up in the NIV and others. Now moving on to what Jesus is actually saying, what he's asking his parents, Mary and Joseph. So literally from the Greek, te hati exetete me. The NIV says, why were you searching for me? The New King James says, why did you seek me? So here in the Greek, we have our interrogative pronoun, and it's used to ask questions. So te, why? Here's our conjunction. Actually, here's our clause, hati exetete me. So why that you, plural, were seeking, so it's in the aorist. So you, plural, were seeking me, our first person personal pronoun. Why that you were seeking me. So remember in the previous, the first part of the Greek, the New King James brought it across quite literally. But now that we get to the second part, why that you were seeking me, the NIV comes very, very close to being literally word for word on this phrase. Why were you searching for me? Searching, of course, perfectly valid way to translate exetete. Searching, seeking, you get the idea. It has a dynamic range there. And then the New King James, why did you seek me? You might, at first glance, say these translations are saying the same thing, and they absolutely are. They're getting across the same idea, but there is small nuance that we can see in the translation choices. The NIV says, why were you searching for me? So the NIV actually does a better job at bringing out the ongoing or imperfect tense of the verb, exetete. And then the New King James says, why did you seek me? It's almost like it sums it up, which is a perfectly valid way to explain, to use the aorist. And it sums it up because, they did complete seeking him because they have now found him. But we can see that this is a subtle difference in the NIV and the New King James. They're both bringing out different flavors of the Greek, but I think the NIV does a better job at bringing out the ongoing tense of this verb. Why were you searching for me? Again, does it impact the translation? Not exactly. And it certainly doesn't change any kind of meaning, but it does add some flavor, which is interesting. One quick note is, of course, in English, we have our question marks that we end a question with. At least in this morphological Greek New Testament, there is no semicolon, or it looks like a semicolon in Greek. That's the Koine Greek version of a question mark. It's not surprising that it's not in here because that stuff came much later. And in the earliest Greek manuscripts, not only did you not have any punctuation, but every letter was capitalized and there were no spaces between words. So that makes things very hard for us to translate today and look at. But back then, that's just how they wrote. Wasn't a problem for them. But again, so this little phrase, te hate exetete me, why that you were seeking me. We can see the subtle differences brought out in the NIV and the New King James. And then finally, to end the verse, we have Jesus asking another question or making a rhetorical statement. I don't know. It's just, he's asking this final question to them here. Let's read it straight from the Greek. Uk edete hati in tois tu patras mu de enai me. So the NIV says, didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? In the New King James, did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? And this is where we come to the question we wanted to answer today. Did Jesus say that he would be in his Father's house or about his Father's business? Let's find out from the Greek. Literally from the Greek, let's just go word for word. Not you knew or you know, so this would be plural, and again, it's an aorist plural verb. So not you, Mary and Joseph, know, hati in tois, that in the, and this our definite article, and it's in the plural. Here's another one, definite article, tu patros, the Father, first person personal pronoun, mu, me, of me, because it's in the genitive. We have de, which is a verb, and means had to be, must be, it is necessary, that kind of thing. Here's our stative verb, enai, and it's in the infinitive, so literally to be, and another first person personal pronoun, me, me. So let's just read it all together straight from the Greek. Not you knew or you know that in the of the Father of me, it is necessary to be me. That's a pretty rough first draft translation straight from the Greek, literal word for word. And we have the NIV. Didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? Did you, or the New King James, did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? So let's start with the NIV. The NIV chose to put house at the end of this. Where are they getting that? Well, it's not from the Greek. Oikos is not here. There is no word for house here. So the question is, where did they get it? I think, and again, I'm no scholar, I'm no professor, I'm no textual critic, anything like that. I'm just giving my best guess. I think the NIV chose house because of the context. It's very clear that because of where Jesus is, that he is in the temple. And so Jesus is asking Mary and Joseph, didn't you know that I had to be in my Father's house? Even though the word house is not here, literally from the Greek, not you know that in the of the Father of me, it is necessary. So there's no word for house there, but the NIV puts house there because of the context, because Jesus is in the temple. And throughout the scriptures, the temple is called the house of the Lord. And so it makes sense. It's a perfectly valid translation. It's a perfectly valid choice of why they made that to put that in there. Then the New King James, did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? No word for business here. So where are they getting that? This is where I think the New King James brings out some real specific nuance of the text. I could be completely wrong. It's possible. But I have a hunch. And I at least have something that I'm basing my hunch on. So if I'm completely wrong, that's fine. But I do have a reason for what I'm about to say. I think they chose business, not because it's coming from the Greek, but because the Greek completely lacks any word after tois here. This is our definite article, and it's in the plural dative. So again, not you knew that in the, and then it just drops off because there is no word there. There's not another noun there. It's just a plural neuter article, and there's no word to pair up with it. Real quickly, this is a pretty common use of the use in Greek, not just with the article, but with other things as well. Could be with verbs, with nouns, but Greek often uses a neuter verb or, a neuter noun or an article to describe a bunch of things, to describe a bunch of people, a group of people, or to describe a summary of events. It uses it for all of these cases. And so I think the translators for the New King James and those that have also chosen to be about my Father's business here at the end, I think they saw that, and they saw that it's in the neuter plural, and they are saying, okay, well, neuter plural, you could almost literally say, not you knew that in the things of the Father of me, it is necessary to be me. And so if Jesus said, did you not know that I must be about my Father's things? That's maybe not the greatest translation, but you get where that's coming from the Greek here, because this is a neuter plural article. It's referring to a bunch of things. So Jesus is saying, I have to be about all of my Father's businesses. He has many purposes here. So the New King James didn't choose to go with just inserting a word from the context here, because their translation approach is more word for word. I feel like they are cueing off of this article more, and therefore they arrive at using the term business. Did you not know that I must be about my Father's business? Interesting.